This is G-Free Radio. Here's your host, Peter Stewart.
Hello, and as Christmas gets ever closer, welcome to episode 32 of the G-Free Radio Show. Hello, I'm Peter Stewart, and G-Free cookbooks, and we'll say cheers to beers over the next 30 minutes or so of our lives together this week. So in this week's episode, we continue our countdown to Christmas. The first of our interviews is with Samantha Stein, who's taken family recipes handed down through generations and converted them to be gluten-free. Here are some of the tantalizing cakes and cookies she's developed in a few minutes' time. And we speak with the man behind Green's gluten-free beers. They've got a broad range of ales in various strengths and tastes and colours that may be perfect as an accompaniment to your Christmas Day turkey. In health news this week, we look at how mice have helped establish a possible link between gluten and diabetes, and a study that's found that those with celiac disease have a higher chance of being hospitalised because of flu this winter season. And we bring you more tips on coping with a gluten-free diet over this festive fortnight. And we'll start this week with that health news and research that suggests that type 1 diabetes can be affected by gluten. Researchers have demonstrated that gluten in the diet may modify the intestinal microbiome, increasing incidences of type 1 diabetes. This report coming from the journal PLOS ONE, that's PLOS. PLOS ONE, mice fed a gluten-free diet had a dramatically reduced incidence of type 1 diabetes. Yeah, they reduced the incidence of type 1 diabetes, which rather perhaps goes against the grain, if you excuse the phrase, of what we usually hear about how being gluten-free can increase the problems in other parts of our health. The gluten-free diet worked to protect the mice against type 1 diabetes, and when researchers added gluten back into the diets of mice, it reversed that positive effect the gluten-free diet had provided. The report says these changes suggest that the presence of gluten is directly responsible for the diabetes, creating effects of diet and determines the gut microflora. So the next step, I guess, for those researchers is to conduct some similar studies in humans. Would you put yourself forward for that? It's an interesting hypothesis, isn't it, that maybe the gluten in the diet increases the risk of diabetes. Well, the flip side of that, as I suggested a few moments ago, is that if you do have celiac disease or if you're on a gluten-free diet, it can increase the risk or the likelihood of something else which is not too good happening to you. And a study published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology has found an increased risk of hospital admissions for influenza in people with celiac disease. The study, which came out of Sweden, compared influenza-related hospital admissions in 3 separate groups of patients. All of the information is detailed at celiacdisease.about.com. It goes into quite a bit of details, but essentially says that the study found both adults and children who've been diagnosed with celiac disease were at increased risk of hospital admission for influenza when compared to the general population. From the results of the study, it looks as though anyone who's been diagnosed with celiac disease might want to consider getting a flu jab. I had mine about a month or 6 weeks ago. So far, so good.
Follow us on Twitter. We're at G-Free Radio.
And we continue our festive feel this week, talking about a G-Free cookbook in a few seconds' time. Incidentally, towards the end of this week's show, we'll wash down all the content with the refreshing G-Free beer. But first, Samantha Stein has produced that gluten-free recipe ebook packed full of her versions of family recipes that she's altered to be celiac friendly.
I've been diagnosed, well, not quite diagnosed, but I've been gluten-free now for about almost 3 years, actually.
Okay, and you're actually living in the Netherlands, but you were living in the United Kingdom until recently. Just give us a quick overview, because I know we're going to chat in the future in a bit more depth about what it's like living gluten-free over there. But just give us a quick overview, just to set the scene.
General supermarket shopping for things that aren't in a niche gluten-free category is actually pretty good. The labelling is very, very good. A lot of the labels are already conforming to the 2014 labelling changes as set out by the EU. So the allergens are in bold, for example, which I find is very, very useful, especially when you're reading a foreign language and you need to work out, is this even an allergen that I should be worried about? There's a lot of good labelling in the main supermarkets here. They're called Albert Heijn. All their own brand products have a crossed grain symbol on them. It ranges from everything from milk to canned tomatoes. Okay, there shouldn't be gluten in canned tomatoes, but you can look at it quickly and go, oh, that's nice.
It's reassuring that it kind of gives
Exactly.
the impression that the whole market, the whole industry knows what it's talking about.
Exactly. And there's a lot of small cultural differences in food that are slightly better, I think, for celiacs. I haven't come across any wheat in processed meats or anything like that. They've all been completely gluten-free. It's less likely to be used as a filler ingredient here. So the general quality of food, I think, is better. But on the other hand, the gluten-free market is quite poor, I think. There isn't a lot of variety in supermarkets, and the only brand they seem to stock is Shah. I think it's called Dr. Shah in the UK. Their bread is pretty bad, so really I don't have anywhere I can go where I can find some decent gluten-free bread, which is a bit of a shame.
So it sounds as though that is the thing you miss the most, just a sandwich or a piece of toast on gluten-free bread. And it's your first Christmas in the Netherlands coming up.
It is.
But you spent quite a few Christmases abroad in Scandinavia, is that right, when you were growing up?
Absolutely. My mum is Danish, and so every Christmas we would go to Denmark to visit my grandma, and it was there that I really sort of started my love of baking. Of course, I wasn't celiac then, so I was just baking kind of the recipes that she had handed down to her.
And are these recipes the ones that you've developed for this book?
Some of them are, yeah, because it turned out after my first gluten-free Christmas, which was a bit of a miserable disaster, I didn't have a lot of fun things to eat. So the next Christmas, I decided never again. I'm going to translate these recipes. And by the time I translated all of my favorites from my childhood, I had almost a whole book, and then had to just find a few more, and it was pretty much finished.
Oh, it's always great, isn't it, when you have recipes which have been handed down over the years, and ones that when you taste them yourself after growing up with those, the taste can bring back so many happy memories, can't it? It can transport you in the same way as a smell or a song.
Absolutely. And, the smell of it baking in the oven is kind of, especially relating to Christmas. I'm a big fan of Christmas. I don't know why. I think it's nice and cozy, and it might have something to do with the baked goods, I'll be honest.
So how easy was it to develop these recipes and change them into a gluten-free variety of recipe?
Somewhat easier than others. I had to experiment. There's a bit with the only bread recipe in there, which is my grandma's special recipe for buns, which are very popular in Scandinavia. They're called boller over there. That was a little bit of hard work, but some of them were easier than others. It really depends on the structure of the baked good to begin with. If it's something that requires a lot of chew and doesn't really have many eggs in it, you might need to experiment. But if it has a lot of eggs and it's more of a cakey thing, then it's not too hard. Sometimes you can actually make a straight swap with normal flour.
And there's something very Christmassy about Scandinavia and so on anyway, isn't there, I think? I suppose it's because of the whole kind of where is Father Christmas from, the whole Lapland thing and the reindeer and the snow and everything all kind of ties together really, really well. So are these recipes, do they have a Scandinavian kind of theme to them?
Some of them do, absolutely. But I've also included the traditional English recipes. They were actually handed down from my partner's side of the family. His grandmother and his mother have given to me their Christmas pudding, the Christmas cake, and their mince pie recipes, which I then translated again to be gluten-free. So that was really nice because I'd never actually eaten Christmas pudding before I did the recipe for this book. So I had no idea what it was even supposed to be like. I'd never steamed a pudding before. I know it's shameful to admit.
Okay. Just before we talk about some of the recipes specifically and the range that there is in the book, Tell us a bit about the process and about the thinking behind them. I mean, I don't want to be going out to buy, a handful of this flour and 2 cups of another flour and a pinch of this and a pinch of that. So are these kind of store cupboard ingredients in the main, especially the flours? I guess I'm really thinking of.
Do you know what? I was trying to make it as easy and as accessible as possible. For all the experimenting that I did, I actually used Dove's Farm plain flour blends. I didn't even use their self-raising for the cakes. I just added baking powder, for example. I think in the UK, Dove's Farm is pretty much the most widespread flour blend available, and it's also pretty cheap. I mean, it's usually about £1.70 a bag, I think, which I thought, that is so much better value than any of the Christmas treats that you can buy in the free from section.
Okay, excellent. Right, so let's get to the nub and the gist then. What is the variety of recipes? You mentioned cakes there. Is it all cakes, and mince pies and Christmas puddings, or a few other things as well? A few sweets or savouries?
Well, it's for the most part sweet. As I mentioned, I do have that the bread bun recipe, which is just fabulous, and it's divided into 3 sections really: cakes and rolls, biscuits and cookies, and then kind of miscellaneous sweets and treats. So there's kind of something for everyone, as long as you like sugar, or sweet things rather. The recipe I used to devour as a child has made it in, which is a rumbles recipe that used to be made with oats. And of course you can still make it with gluten-free oats, but I am intolerant to that, so I had to look hard to find an alternative to gluten-free oats. And I actually used buckwheat flakes for that.
Oh, right. Yes, I'm looking at that at the moment. And you've a bit of marketing here, Samantha, calling them Rudolph's Rumbles. I see what you did there.
Yeah, a little bit naughty, maybe.
Okay, with real rum?
Yeah, you can do. I mean, it certainly helps the children sleep a little sounder. I think there's only a couple of tablespoons of rum anyway. It's really just for the flavour. I remember we used to make them and then put them in my grandma's pantry, which was always nice and cold. They'd sit overnight, and then the next day we'd have them, and nobody else got a look in. I was such a little pig as a child. And I ate a lot of these. It's probably why I developed celiac disease,
Now I'm looking at, yes, I know the feeling. Looking down the list, there's lots of words and terms I recognise or even can guess at about what kind of flavours that they are. However, Lebkuchen, I'm not even sure I've pronounced that correctly. So
Lebkuchen.
Oh, Lebkuchen.
It's a German word. Actually, this is one of the only recipes in the collection that I'm really proud of it, because I made it from scratch myself. I didn't have anything to go by or any kind of recipes to follow. I take it you've never had Lebkuchen before, then?
Not knowingly. Is it a chewy, spicy type of gingerbread which develops a deeper flavour if the dough is allowed to rest in the fridge overnight? Is that what it is?
It certainly is. Yeah.
Okay.
These are very popular in Germany, and they come with candied fruit in them. Sometimes they're covered in chocolate, sometimes they're covered in kind of a white sugary crust. But they're just absolutely Moorish, and they just taste like Christmas, absolutely. It's the mixed spices, the ginger, the nutmeg, and the cloves. Those are the flavours of Christmas to me.
And looking at another one which has caught my eye, and these are the stained glass biscuits.
Yeah, those are really fun to hang on your tree, although you probably wouldn't want to hang them for too long, otherwise they might go stale. They use the biscuit recipe from another recipe, and then what you do is you cut a hole in the middle of the cookies, and you get some boiled sweets, you smash them up, and then sprinkle the smashed sweets into the middle. As they bake, they form like a glass or a sort of sugary glass type substance. You can't quite see it in the picture, but they're actually kind of translucent, so they have a stained glass effect, which
Absolutely.
is very, very pretty.
This book has come out just in time for Christmas, but also, I guess, if people get a Kindle or a Nook or something like that for Christmas, they can download it. I think more than 50% of book downloads are on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. I seem to have read somewhere, or maybe I've just made that
true?
up. But yeah, so it's a good opportunity. People get a book. They get an ebook, and then they think, right, okay, well this is good, but there's nothing on it. So they frantically search around and start downloading things. So hopefully your book will be front of mind when they do that.
Absolutely, yeah. The PDF, you can download it from my website, and it's been tested on iPads, Kindles, all these kind of things, so it should work across all platforms.
And our thanks to Samantha Stein. You can follow her at The Happy Coeliac on Twitter. That's celiac with an O, of course, and also her website if you want more information about that cookbook, The Happy Coeliac. Again, with the O in the middle, thehappycoeliac.com. Our thanks to her. Coming a bit later on, we've got some news about some gluten-free beers that you could drink over the festive fortnight. Some nice refreshing ones, various tastes and flavours and colours and so on. So David from Greens Beers, we'll be hearing from him a little bit later on. But now it's a good time, perhaps, good a time as any, to remind you that all of our previous episodes, this being episode 32, there are another 31 that you can download and listen to. They're always available, they're always free, and you can find them in various places via gfreeradio.com. They're also on YouTube and on iTunes as well. Listen regularly, listen long, and don't forget to come back here every week for the brand new episode of the world's only weekly G-Free and Coeliac podcast, G-Free Radio. And I'm Peter Stewart. Hello, welcome to G-Free Radio, and it is episode 32. Got a special couple of programmes lined up for you over the Christmas New period. Hear more about those in next week's episode, and we'll hear about what's in next week's episode at the end of this week's episode, which is in the next 10 minutes or so, right here. First of all, how to cope with the gluten-free diet over the holidays. We touched on this subject a little bit in last week's show. To bring you some more suggestions and ideas, these are from celiacdisease.about.com and Jane Anderson and her suggestions, saying that holidays in our culture revolve around food. Therefore, the holidays tend to be one of the toughest times of the year for people who've got celiac disease or follow a gluten-free diet, especially, of course, if you're newly diagnosed. It's pretty difficult, isn't it, to be at a dinner party or a buffet do, or sitting around the holiday dinner table watching friends and family, work colleagues, enjoying foods that you can't have anymore, and you often feel as though you're being left out just a little bit. It does get easier over the time, and there are some things you can do to try and make it easier, even if it is your first holiday season as a gluten-freer. And here are some suggestions.
1.
Hold gluten-free holiday celebrations at home. Well, it seems quite straightforward and obvious, really, doesn't it? But if you do hold your Christmas party or your drinks gathering at home, of course, you can control the food. You know what's gone into it, and you know jolly well there's no risk of cross-contamination.
2.
Try some new gluten-free recipes. The holidays, maybe you've got a bit more time off from work, maybe possibly perhaps, or perhaps you're being run ragged, but either way, it's a great time to try out some new gluten-free recipes. You often want to impress people or start a new holiday tradition, don't you? I mean, heck, you may want to try some of those recipes from Sam's book we heard about a few minutes ago.
3.
Don't focus so much on the actual food. Ignoring holiday food, Jane says, might seem impossible, especially with Christmas cookies and chocolates and mince pies on every desk at work, and constant parties and drinks do's and school parties and events, and even samples being handed out at the supermarket. But one of the best ways for coping with the holidays gluten-free is to plan activities that don't involve food. At least they're not revolving around food. So maybe that could be a holiday concert or a show if you go to a pantomime or to some other play or theatre event, where you can take the chocolates that you know you can eat. And that way, of course, you save money on those expensive ones they sell in the foyer as well, don't you? Or take the family ice skating. Marshmallows, they're going to be fine afterwards. Hot chocolate, possibly not, but maybe you could have a hot coffee instead to warm you up afterwards. A Christmas tree lighting ceremony, those kinds of things. They're not revolving around food as much as a Christmas party per se. You might not escape the food entirely, but you can find places where it's not the actual focus of the whole entertainment.
4.
Remember to feel joyful for your good health. You know, many people with celiac disease feel dramatically better after they've been on the gluten-free diet for a bit. So rather than concentrating, dwelling and ranking up the importance of what you can't eat anymore, focus on how much better you feel when you are gluten-free. It's not a cure, but it can help.
5.
Whatever you do, don't cheat on the diet. Not only do you run the risk of a bad reaction that could ruin some of your holiday plans, you also risk long-term damage to your health. And remember that very often your reaction to gluten gets much more severe the longer you remain gluten-free.
Follow us on Twitter. We're at G-Free Radio.
Okay, now let's wash down this week's episode of the G-Free Radio Show with a drop of G-Free beer. Recently, I caught up with David from Greens Beers, who told me about their range.
I'm David Ware. I'm the owner and proprietor of Greens Gluten-Free Beers. We were the first gluten-free beer on the market back in 2004, in fact, possibly the first one in Europe. Since that time, we've moved on a while to produce a range of 8 different beers, soon to be 9.
I was going to say, because looking at your board there, well, let's wander over if we can. We got the premium, the supreme golden ale, the blonde, dark ale, amber, and several. What are the differences in all of those kinds of flavours?
We produce beer with gluten-free raw materials, whereby we brew from sorghum, millet, buckwheat and brown rice. And we also deglutenise conventional beers, which is common practice now for gluten-free beers in certain markets. We are the only brewer in the world who produces a range of beers using both methods. And therefore, we're able to produce a range of 8 different beers, and in December, soon to be 9, with the launch of an India Pale Ale.
Okay.
So we try and capture most of the different beer profiles, beer styles, so that we can provide celiac choice. Choice to a celiac is a big deal.
Tell me, David, how long have you been going? Well, how did you decide to come to set up the business in the first place?
Well, back in 2004, there's a gentleman called Derek Green. He was a celiac himself, and he just pined for a beer. He went around all the brewers in the UK, and because he couldn't quantify what could actually be brewed or what the demand was, he couldn't find any interest from the UK brewers. So we ended up going to Belgium, and we ended up speaking to a Belgian professor of brewing, whose daughter happened to be celiac. And he brewed in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, they brew extensively with sorghum to make beer, because you can't grow barley in Central Africa because it's too hot.
Okay, right.
So he produced them. So the Belgian professor and Mr. Derek Green went on to produce a range of gluten-free beers naturally made from sorghum, millet, buckwheat and brown rice. And then in 2007, we found the process of actually removing the gluten from a conventional beer.
This is what they're calling deglutenisation, isn't it?
Yeah. And people have naturally have a certain degree of trepidation of stepping into that market. Certain people are very sensitive to gluten, and we understand that. That's why we retain our naturally gluten-free range, which is zero gluten.
So this is made out of grains that didn't have any gluten in to begin with?
To all intents and purposes, the grass. Sorghum, millet and buckwheat are actually types of grass. No malted grains come into this at all.
And what's the reaction when people say, OK, so it's a beer, it's a lager, but millet, buckwheat, because these are grains that people aren't naturally using on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the proof of the pudding, tasting is believing.
It's in the drinking, isn't it?
As they say. The tasting is believing. In the Free From Awards this year, in 2013, the dry hop lager got first prize. The judges thought it an absolutely outstanding lager. And we try and add some craft by adding the extra hops at the end. And we're proud of that, but we're also proud of the fact that, as I say, there are some deglutenised beers out there, and we test thoroughly. Our testing procedures are very extensive. We test both in the fermentation vessel, we test in the bottle, and then we test in batches when it comes over to the UK from Belgium.
So that triple testing must be very important.
Triple testing, we are
very reassuring.
Well, I'm glad you think so. We're paranoid. We want to make sure that our beers are safe to everybody, for everybody to drink.
You've got a bit of competition now, though, haven't you? I won't mention the other brands, but a few other lagers have come into the market over the last few years. How do you differentiate yourself from those?
Well, Well, firstly, we welcome competition. And I don't mean that glibly, I mean that sincerely. There is still a lot of celiacs out there who are not aware that a gluten-free beer actually exists. We've been around since 2004, but the actual awareness of the category isn't still where it should be. So we welcome the likes of Estrella and Celia coming along, and working together we can extol the virtues of gluten-free beer as a whole.
And it is expanding the market.
And it's expanding the market. Where we differentiate, well, we have a range. We have a range of ales and lagers. Light lagers, pilsners, through to light ales, to blonde, to dark. So we pride ourselves on having a complete range of choice for celiacs.
And where can people do their own taste test? How do they get hold of these beers and lagers?
All the beers are available online, to purchase online. Do free delivery on 3 cases or more. The Pilsner and the Golden Ale are available in Sainsbury's. The Golden Ale is available in Co-op. And this year we're proud to say that the Pilsner is available in Pizza Express in all their restaurants, both in the UK and Ireland. And
that must have been quite a coup.
I think it's a great sign of things to come. It's gluten-free beer coming into the mainstream. What more can we ask for?
David from Green's Gluten-Free Beers. Thanks very much indeed to him for his time, and to you for yours in listening to episode 32 of the G-Free Radio Show. Next week we start the first of our special Christmas editions, and we're going to be devoting a lot of time to some sweet treats that you could indulge in over the Christmas period. Let's have a little look at what we've got lined up. We're going to be speaking to a company that makes some fantastic desserts, a company called Podology, and also Sweet Cheeks, and also Emerald City Cupcakes as well, and Adoris Treats. They make various cakes, as you might imagine. We're going to be speaking to Carolyn from the Free From Bakehouse, and also a company that makes some fantastic gluten-free and ethically conscious chocolates as well. Almost putting on the calories just thinking about all of those. Hope to have your company next week as the G-Free Radio Show continues.
And that was the G-Free Radio Show with Peter Stewart. And you. Thanks for listening. And remember, until next time, be good, be healthy, and be G-Free.